got back. He's not going to be able to be on.
Oh, okay. We'll call the Monday, October 7, 2024 Rivendell Lunch and Learn Council meeting to order, and ask Nicole to take roll call, please.
Bodie? Carberry?
Here, sorry.
Oh, there we go. Carberry Montgomery?
Here.
Kroll?
Here.
Rosendahl?
Here.
And McBurney is absent.
Nicole, we're getting an echo when you speak. I don't know if you have two different feeds going that are maybe about a half second apart, so. All right, so is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Motion by Kroll, second by Carberry Montgomery. Discussion, roll call.
Thank you. I think I have my audio fixed. Kroll?
All right.
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery?
Yes.
Rosendahl?
Yes.
Bodie?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, item 3 is we have 2 items for discussion today. First is the 2024 construction update. AJ, will you kick us off, or who's going to kick us off here?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The construction projects that are ongoing in the city, some have been completed, some are ongoing. As we talk about during our CIP process and budget process, when we engage in the actual physical construction of the projects that you've authorized, our goal, and weather related and everything else, that many of the things that are out of our control, our goal is to have things buttoned up by the last, right before Thanksgiving. A number of our suppliers, asphalt plants, concrete, those type of folks, are already shutting down for winter. But having said all that, our annual update gives you a update as to where we are with those projects. The one on Douglas, I'm sure those of you who travel it get to see that progress, and our staff will be talking about that. But other things that you may have already forgotten about because they're already done and completed, and everything's on their way. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to turn it over to John Larson and his staff from the Public Works and Engineering staff to provide that overview. And as you mentioned, there's one of 2 discussion items. The first is to talk about the project, and the second is to talk about some, I'm trying to think of the right terminology. I don't have my agenda here in front of me, but it was the stormwater connection related issues associated with some of those projects. So John, it's up to you now.
And I think I'm just going to dive right in.
Sorry. Kristen, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Kristen's actually taking lead on this. We'll let her start.
Thank you.
So let me share my screen here. And yeah, as AJ mentioned, we do want to make sure that we have time to get through the foundation drain disconnect program and have some time for discussion on that. So I'm going to try to keep moving on the construction update. Please feel free to chime in if you've got questions or need some additional info. Otherwise, I will keep proceeding through to make sure that we've got time to get to everything. So diving right in, hopefully you all can see the presentation. There it goes. Starting with the Merle Hay Storm Sewer Project, we've got the location map up there. We are putting a very large culvert up through Douglas, through the Merle Hay facility to Madison and Airline. Fred Soddy in our office is the inspector on this one, and Eric Peterson is our project manager. We have about 1,600 linear feet of box culvert and 1,000 tons of riprap at that south end. The storm sewer is being extended to Madison Avenue and Airline Avenue for further extensions that are documented in our 2019 stormwater drainage study. This was not one of the original 10 projects that were prioritized in that study because we did not think it would be feasible with the location of it, but circumstances changed and we were able to move this one closer to the top of the list. Without this project, we really can't open the rest of that neighborhood up for the continued extensions. So this is really critical to getting storm sewer to that neighborhood. The cost of the project is $5.78 million. Our contractor for this is CJ Moynia, I'm sorry, drew a blank for a minute, CJ Moynia with Progressive Structures. And the original schedule is that this was supposed to be a 2-year project. Now that they've gotten across Douglas and they're making their way up through the mall, they're moving very quickly, and they are actually aiming to wrap this up before Thanksgiving. So the nice thing about it is that other than the mall utilities, which have been a little bit of an obstacle, there's not a lot of other utilities in that parking lot to deal with, and so it allows them to go faster than a similar project would go on a street. Few photos for you here. This is the outfall. This is where the restaurant used to be, and now we've got this new head wall. The culvert on the left was the existing culvert that ran actually underneath the restaurant, and then you can see the new head wall incorporates the new culvert on the right. We also placed some riprap, and they've put the erosion control matting down. This was a couple of weeks ago, so things haven't quite popped there yet for the grass, but it will be restored that way. Kind of get a scale of the size of this box. You can see the construction workers in there. They brought in a very large crane and backhoe to get these moved around and get those boxes positioned. And the trench boxes are fairly deep because they have to make it all the way up around the mall property. Again, another shot of some of the utilities that they had to deal with. They worked on supporting the water main and several utility ducts as they slid the box underneath those. That was part of the reason why going across Douglas was slow going, was the utilities in that area. On the right is the shot. It's kind of hard to tell, but we are between Lillis Loft and IHOP heading north through that area. Again, the trench is somewhat deep, makes it a tricky work location. And then this is the pouring back of Douglas Avenue. It was PCC with an HMA overlay and paving of the IHOP parking lot. The parking lot has been paved and is reopened. They've got a little bit of work to do at the IHOP entrance, and then they'll be done in that area. So to give you an idea of where we're at now, we are into stage 4. They're hoping to make some of the connections to Madison with a separate crew this week. They are proceeding north into stage 5. And then they'll turn the corner there. And we have an upcoming project, we'll mention it again later, but an upcoming project to extend those farther west. As long as we're here, the intersection here at 65th and Airline had some severe flooding in that June 2018 event. It's kind of a local low spot with no outlets. So in a few years, when we can extend that storm farther west, that will really provide much better storm sewer service to that area. Okay, moving on to our next project, the Meredith Drive and 121st Street pavement preservation. You can see where that's located on Meredith between 121st and 104th Street, and then between Douglas and Meredith Drive. We have 12,000 square yards of PCC patching over 2.2 miles. That includes 5,500 tons of HMA overlay. We did that between 114th Street and 104th Street on Merrill Hay Road. It's a 3-inch thick overlay done in 2 lifts. As part of our Complete Streets Master Plan, we are building the 10-foot trail and associated ramps from Northwest Urbandale Drive to 104th Street. We already have a trail east of Northwest Urbandale Drive, and then next year we're going to do a patch and overlay continuing east to 86th Street, and as council knows, we will be extending the trail with that project. The cost of the project was $2.4 million for the construction, and then another $1.1 million for undergrounding the electrical and replacing the street lights between the railroad and 104th Street. As far as schedule goes, we have the roadway portion of this essentially complete. They've still got a few structure adjustments to make, but the patch and overlay is done. The trail has to wait until the poles are removed, the electrical poles. Intren is the sub for Mid-Am. They are working on that project now, and we're still hoping that that can get in yet this year. Inspector on this project is Scott Ford, and our project manager in the office is Jordan Babler. Photo for you of the asphalt overlay work. They did do that at night. It does require full road closure. You can reopen side roads and driveways pretty quickly after that. Usually there's not about half an hour is a total closure for like a driveway if there's no other route. But to close down the whole road and do it at night really helps the contractor have the room to work and to go quickly. And then here's a shot of the completed overlay looking west from Northwest Urbandale Drive. It looks pretty nice when it's done. As we think about complete streets on Aurora, this is one of the reasons why we want to do that little overlay on Aurora. It really helps the pavement markings pop and you can see things very clearly. 70th Street and Hopkins Road storm sewer. I put a little arrow at the intersection of 69th and Hopkins. What happened was the storm sewer was damaged from concrete that was dumped into it. It was almost completely blocked at a couple of locations along this run, and that caused local flooding at that intersection. Thankfully, the overtopping for that, it was down the street before it got into people's homes, so there wasn't a danger to the buildings, but obviously it was a problem that needed to be fixed. So Tim Terrell is the inspector for this project. We are replacing 553 linear feet of storm sewer with this. We are upsizing it per those recommendations from the 2019 stormwater drainage study. That's kind of a high-level study, so we did refine those calculations and look at the capacity again, and we are sizing that appropriately. It was a bit of a challenge with the electrical, gas, and other utilities in the area, but we were able to make it work. We are also replacing the sidewalks with 5-foot sidewalks and the associated ramps. The cost of the project is $250,000, and they're making good progress on it. We expect them to wrap up. I hate to jinx it and say out loud, but in the near future, let's say, they'll be wrapping this one up. And again, just to get a sense of the size of the change in the storm sewer, there was a 18-inch on 70th Street and a 15-inch on Hopkins Road. Those are both being upsized to 30-inch pipes, so quite a big change. Kind of tough to get photos on this one, partly because the contractor's moving quickly. So they've got the new backfill in and getting the sidewalks in and getting those driveways open back up again. Douglas urbanization. We're calling this the Douglas urbanization project from 86th to 75th because that's where we're adding the curb and gutter. We also had some work at the west end with some sidewalk and trail improvements. Also, I want to point out here in the middle is 82nd Street. That's a section of roadway that is very, very flat. It does not have storm sewer, and it was not draining well. Lots of puddling after rain events, and the pavement was essentially falling apart because of the saturation. So originally, it was its own separate page in the CIP, and then when this project came along, it made a lot of sense to combine the two together. Looking at the extents of this project, this is a complete streets project. So west of 86th Street, there is a 10-foot trail on the north side to connect to the creek. On the south side, there's a 10-foot trail with the 5-foot sidewalk, which is our standard complete street section. And then that continues east of 86th Street as well. I think I need to correct that bullet point. So we've got that on both sides of 86th Street on the south side. There's 7,100 linear feet of curb and gutter, so quite a bit of curb and gutter, and we're starting to see that go in, which is exciting. We are doing some pavement preservation on this project while we're at it, mill and overlay at the east end, and then patching as needed in most directions. There is 4,500 linear feet of trench storm sewer, and then 500 linear feet where we're boring across Douglas. That is to keep Douglas open. If we had to open trench it across Douglas, we would need to close it for quite a while, similar to what we had to do at Douglas down at Merlehay Mall. So the boring really helps with the traveling public to keep that open. This storm sewer does incorporate the recommendations from the 2019 stormwater drainage study. Again, it may be a few years before we can do the neighborhoods north of Douglas, but by upsizing the storm sewer now, that opens up those possibilities and prepares for that future work. The cost of this project is $5.5 million. This project did have delays due to the very wet spring. Obviously, when you're putting in storm sewer and you're at the bottom of the hill, the weather raining every 3 days does affect your timeline. We also had issues with AT&T line that was in the way. It was actually not in the locate system. So despite all of our efforts to coordinate with utilities ahead of time, neither we nor apparently they knew where their facilities were in the area. We also had delays on utilities in the previous project for the Douglas urbanization to 100th Street. We certainly learned from that experience and were more proactive about a number of things on this project for utility coordination, and still we had this unknown and unexpected hurdle that came up. So unfortunately, no matter how much you plan, there's always going to be some unknowns that you just can't predict, and that did cause quite a delay since they were not in the system for utility notifications. The good news is the contractor's been working very, very hard to get caught up. They've had 5 crews on site essentially since mid-August when weather started to improve, and they've been doing as much as they can simultaneously on this project. We do think at this point that 82nd Street cannot reasonably be done this year. We do not want to remove that pavement and then have those residents on temp pavement or some other surface over the winter. So we are pushing that back until next spring and getting it done then when we can know that they'll be good for the winter season. To kind of show you a picture of the extent of the work, this was a shot taken near the end of August. You can see on kind of the left side, they're working on getting storm sewer installed. On the east side, it's kind of hard to see with poles in the way, but we've got storm sewer running up both sides of the street. So they're installing on both sides. At the same time, they've got a crew boring underneath the roadway, and then they've got other crews that come in to do the pavement. So in the 6 weeks since then, the next picture is from last week. They've got the storm, well, you can't see it because it's underground, but they've got the storm sewer and the water installed, particularly on the west or south side. We had quite a bit of water main that needed adjusted. They've got the trail in, they've got quite a bit of curb and gutter in. They're starting to put those side roads back together and reopen those. And you can really see both the number of crews that are on site working as well as the progress they've made. So we appreciate their efforts on that. And then just a couple of shots of the storm sewer. It is quite deep in locations, again, because we're trying to get that capacity up to the neighborhoods for future extensions. Our annual patch program, yeah.
On the southeast corner of Douglas and 86th, there's a traffic crossing button that's kind of farther back behind all the tape and rope and everything. Mm-hmm. Do we know when that's going to be more accessible again, just so that folks that are getting up to that corner can more easily cross?
Yeah, the southeast corner is actually closed right now for pedestrians because of the sidewalk being out. So I do not know when that will go back in. Obviously, the goal is to complete all the work on Douglas yet this fall. So I would hope as soon as they can safely put it in, they'll get it in.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Our patch program. We had 3 phases again this year, 2 in residential neighborhoods, and then 1 on Douglas. In eastern Urbandale, last year we had worked near Lochner Drive. Now we're doing kind of the other half of that neighborhood. It was about 4,800 square yards of patching there. And then in the Parkview neighborhood, we had about 7,500 square yards of patching. We did not patch Parkview itself. Originally, that was part of the plan, and then it just became clear that the street there was so deteriorated that we really need to look at a full reconstruction. So that's one of the things we'll discuss with the upcoming CIP projects. And then, of course, we always include any impacted ADA ramps with those replacements. The phase 2 of the project was patching on Douglas Avenue near the roundabout, doing some maintenance on that arterial. The cost of all 3 projects was $1.17 million. A portion of this year's money for pavement rehab was used for Douglas Avenue urbanization. That's why the number's a little lower than our usual levels. And then all these 3 projects are complete. Brothers Construction was the contractor for all 3, and we are working with them on wrapping up the punch list and final restoration to get those closed. Our inspectors for these projects were Tim Terrell and Scott Ford. And again, just looking at the locations for this, so this is phase 1. It was north of Meredith and east of 72nd Street. Phase 2 was along Douglas Avenue, just a few patches that needed some attention. And then phase 3 is in that Parkview neighborhood. And again, you can see there that we did not actually patch on Parkview. Hammond Tree, we also did not patch on because it's a composite pavement. So we'll look at addressing both of those in future projects. Our community entrance signs. We are wrapping up our 3 from the 2023 project at 86th Street and the south ramp of the interstate. At Northwest Urbandale Drive, replaced the previous sign that was at that location, and then we've got the smaller monument at 100th Street south of 54th Avenue. That was a $320,000 contract with Edge Construction. And again, we should be closing that in the very near future. For the project that's currently under construction, we have 2 gateway signs, one at 104th Street in Hickman and one at 128th Street, the North Corporate Limits. That's also with Edge Construction at $235,000. Michael Johnson in our office is the inspector for both these projects. These projects do include the lighting. the landscaping will be completed by Parks after the projects are done. So this is our new sign at Northwest Urbandale Drive as you come into town from the interstate. That's the one that we replaced the existing sign. This will also be similar to the sign that's currently being constructed at 104th Street and Hickman Road. And then at 86th Street and the South Ramp, we've got the taller monument. This will be what is currently being constructed at 128th Street in the North Corporate Limit. And then on the right is our smaller monument that we used at 100th Street and 54th Avenue. Our bank stabilization projects. We currently have a project under contract for the repairs in Sunflower Park and Walnut Creek Regional Park north of Douglas. These were designed by JEO, permits received, we're under contract with RW Excavating. We use a number of practices on these projects. We look for a stretch that needs repair, and then we ask the consultant to recommend treatments for this. These include bendway weirs, longitudinal peak stone toe protection, tongue twister, riprap, slope protection, and grass seeding, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. As with our past projects, we have made an effort to protect the existing trees and the trail. We do have some trail repairs that will be taking place with Sunflower Park, but a lot of these we've got vertical banks, we've got fairly deep creeks, and we try to avoid simply laying back the slopes and rip-wrapping the world out there. We try to have a little bit more sensitive and context-appropriate practices. This is a $389,000 contract. It has not yet started yet. The contract will start in December. This is easy to do tree clearing and earthwork in the winter. So I put two little flags on where these projects are, again, in Walnut Creek Regional Park, north of Douglas Parkway on Walnut Creek, and then just a little bit north of here on Sunflower Park, north of Douglas. So the longitudinal peak stone toe protection, we used this practice at Beaver Creek a few years ago, and the idea is that you put a line of riprap along the bank in such a way that as the creek naturally evolves and changes shape through the water flows and the natural erosion that takes place, that baseline of riprap helps stabilize the bottom of the bank, and it sort of self-fills over time to provide a natural slope. So by anchoring the bottom, we prevent that erosion from continuing out farther into the bank, but it also helps minimize the amount of riprap that you use and it leaves it in more natural condition. It takes it a few years to fill in. The intent is it does it over time, and it helps to provide that stable cross-section for the flows. And then bendway weirs, we've used these a number of locations, and they've worked pretty well for us. The idea is that you put the riprap kind of at an angle, and you calculate the angle that needs to be at, and that does two things. It helps direct the flow of the energy back to the middle of the stream, so pushing that energy flow from the water away from the bank. It also allows some siltation behind those bendway weirs, so again, it kind of fills in, and you get a little bench down there, which helps stabilize the bottom of that bank and provide some resiliency when storm events come, particularly because we actually have fairly low flows in North Walnut Creek and in Walnut Creek a good portion of the time. They tend to be kind of peaky in storm events, and then they subside. So this helps provide kind of that stable base, keep the flow of the low flow energy near the middle of the creek, and then protect that bank when the higher flows come along. So in Sunflower Park, here's a couple of photos of the vertical banks we've got there. We also have similar ones in Walnut Creek Regional Park, but I thought this showed it a little bit better. So we've got some bendway weir practices. We've got the longitudinal peak stone toe protection practices. We do have some tree removals that have to take place, and hopefully just stabilizing that bank to keep it from moving further into the park or into people's property. And then similar project for next year with Gulf View Park and Walnut Creek bank stabilization, and this would be Walnut Creek south of Douglas Avenue. JEO is also designing this one for us. We've submitted permits and they're working on refining the design. Again, we're using those practices. We're also using some tree topping practices in Gulf View Park, and I'll show you more about that in a minute. Again, we've been working with the Parks Department to provide a product that works for them long term. and we made an effort to protect the existing trees and trail, stabilize those vertical banks. We do get a lot of concerns from residents when we remove trees, particularly in Gulfview Park. It's right in everyone's backyard, and so we try to be very respectful of not clear cutting the trees. The estimated cost of this project is $925,000. We did get pretty good prices on the last bank stabilization that we just talked about. I'm certainly hoping that the cost of that goes down when we actually go out to bid, but it's kind of hard to estimate what these projects will cost. A lot of it's labor instead of materials, and so it's a little tough to estimate. Again, the locations for you there on Walnut Creek, south of Douglas Parkway, and then in Gulfview Park, east of 100th Street. And again, we've got these vertical banks, and this is Walnut Creek Regional Park, but very similar to Gulfview Park, where we've got trees that are literally falling into the stream because the banks eroded around them. So like this one in the middle of the stream, this needs to be cut off, and this needs to be removed. Some of these a little bit farther back on the bank, you don't really want to remove the entire tree because removing that root ball will destabilize the bank. And so one of the practices we're looking at with this project is called tree topping, where you actually cut off the tree either a few feet above the ground or farther up. I know visually we've had a lot of discussions with parks about this, what it's going to look like. The idea is that the leftover stump does provide habitat for a number of animals that are looking for that sort of thing. Plus, it allows a more natural degradation of it over time without disturbing that bank. So that's one of the practices we're looking at in Gulfview Park in particular. Okay, so to recap our major projects, we've got kind of a list there. I'm not going to go through every single one. We've tried to notify, mark which ones were designed by city staff. We've made it through quite a bit this year. One thing I didn't mention was the Walnut Creek Regional Park Trail and Bridge. That's also with RW Excavating and will be done this winter. They'll start construction on that as well. We've got other inspectors in the office. Coleman May and Sean Watson helped with the sidewalks and the trail projects. Dustin Creech, one of our project managers, also assisted with those. And then we've got a new GIS technician, Caleb Strupy Wheeler, who's been helping with our sidewalk program, really helping us get back up to speed with our GIS stuff. And then our locator, Cheyenne Thomas, helps with all these projects, making sure everything gets located. Other projects not on that list, these are kind of smaller ones that we've also been working through. As I mentioned, we've had a number of trail and sidewalk projects this year. We've got our ongoing sewer maintenance projects, and then the 100th Street Adaptive, we've been working with the DOT to finalize the requirements for that, and we're hoping to do the final phase of that shortly. In addition to our city projects, we inspect the subdivision projects that are building public assets, public infrastructure for our acceptance. We had quite a few projects last year. A lot of these are fairly large. Highland Meadows, Plats 5 and 6, Bentley Ridge, Plat 1. These are large projects. Ferry Tower, Urban Loop Commerce Park are two of our commercial developments. And then we've got a number of others still in progress. Bentley Ridge is a large plat. Total Health Experience is the commercial development on North Park. We've got a number that are in the queue. It has seemed the last few years we had a big spike in development post-COVID, a lot of lots being built. We have quite a few lots in Urbandale. Development is slowing down a little bit. The subdivisions are getting smaller. I think across the board, across Iowa, we've heard that development is slowing. Also, I think at this point, we do have a lot of lots in Urbandale that are available for building, so there's less of a demand, but it is slowing down compared to the last couple of years. And then looking ahead to 2025, the major projects that are coming up, we are reconstructing 142nd Street as our standard 4-lane arterial cross-section, including the Complete Streets Trail from Meredith Drive to Waterford. That's a joint project with Grimes. The Roseland Drive reconstruction, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but that's our next major project from the 2019 Stormwater Drainage Study. Our usual annual patch project. We've also got a number of projects for patching and pavement preservation that are using TIF funds, such as the Justin Drive project. We already talked about the bank stabilization. And then we've got our usual, I guess you might call them smaller or routine projects, the ADA plan, trail improvements, traffic signal improvements, that sort of thing. Obviously, the Hickman interchange is continuing with the DOT's lead on that. And then the WRA trunk sewer, we'll talk about a little bit more about that, is coming in the next year or so to improve their capacity. They are constructing a new trunk sewer from Hickman to tie in to Douglas, is tying in near where Waukee and Grimes started their sewer extensions several years ago. For the most part, it is paralleling our sanitary sewer. There's a little bit of change in alignment up by 142nd Street, but for the most part, it parallels us. So we've been working with the WRA and Snyder and our Parks Department as this comes along. And then to give you the bigger picture of that, the red is our section. They are hoping to start that next year. Depends on right-of-way acquisition and their permitting process, but that's their goal. And then it's kind of unusual to start at the top end, but that's just the way this project worked out. They'll continue on to the southeast in 2 more phases to get down to the trunks in Des Moines. So we'll keep you updated on that as it comes along. And then circling back to our 2019 stormwater drainage study, we've been giving you annual updates on how we're proceeding through that. Just a reminder that we had the 2021 study. We call it it was completed in 2021. It was started in 2019, so we call it the 2019 stormwater study. There were 10 locations initially identified for first priority. As I mentioned, we've moved stuff around as projects come along. It opened up for that Merle Hay project, so we certainly wanted to bump that up higher on the list. And then we'll continue to reevaluate as circumstances and projects come down the pipeline. Our next major project is the Roseland Drive project from the creek up to 72nd Street, and then on Palm Drive from Roseland to 72nd Street. We are aiming to go out to bid for this in January. We've been going back and forth on the staging for this. If everything goes smooth, and you know how that goes, I think it could be a 2-year project. Our suspicion is it'll probably end up being a 3-year project. Obviously, with these older neighborhoods and the narrow right-of-way, we have a lot of utilities to deal with. We are in ongoing discussions with Mid-American Electric and Gas on how to service them while the construction happens. And then this also is a project that feeds into our next agenda item, the Footing Drain Disconnect program. So we'll be circling back on this as part of that agenda item. And we are planning to have a public meeting on this. I don't know if we can get it scheduled yet in October, probably in November before Thanksgiving for the neighborhood. And again, our upcoming stormwater CIP projects right now, Roseland Drive would be 25 to 27. 66th Street, that's the one I mentioned. Oh, you know what? I got these flipped around. 66th Street, 65th Street in Townsend, that'll be at least a 2-year project, 2026 and 27. That's Meredith Drive and then south on 65th and 66th to provide storm sewers to those neighborhoods. The Airline Avenue, Madison Avenue extensions, that should just be a 1-year project, 2026, and that's the one I talked about previously, extending from that new Merle Hay storm sewer west to provide relief for those low-lying intersections. And then a little farther down the road, Oliver Smith is our next in line. Again, we've got some flexibilities. We decided this, but these are major projects to design, so we need to look a few years out to see what fits best in the schedule. Okay, that was the construction update. This is our office squirrel that lives outside the window. So any questions I can answer?
Kristen, what type of communications happening in the 66th Meredith, 65th neighborhood for planning purposes?
So we are very early in the design process for that. We selected the engineer a few months ago, and we haven't even gotten a preliminary submittal yet. We talked conceptually about where some things could go. We will have some of the same difficulties with that project that we have with Roseland Drive, how to get the construction through with the electrical and the gas. I would expect we would follow a similar sequence of notifications on that we do for Roseland. Obviously, we want to let folks know that the project is coming. These storm sewer projects were also prioritized based on the pavement condition, because for the most part, they require total pavement replacement, and those streets are in really bad shape. And in our experience, the neighbors are glad to hear that they're going to get a brand new street. So certainly we need to chat with them, but it's really early days as far as the design goes. We don't have a lot of information to give them yet.
And remind me again, the time frame for that one was 26, 27?
26, 27, yeah. So theoretically, we go out to bid in the spring of 26 and start that construction in that spring. Again, it sort of depends on how things shake out with the CIP process.
Yeah. And you're right, those roads are horrible right now.
Yeah, not great. Oops. Any other questions?
What's a stormwater stream restoration project where you're using grasses? Can you tell me what are we getting natives in there? What are we doing?
Sure. So we work with the park department on that, and there are many locations where we do put natives in. There's some others that they tend to go with more like the type 2, the more rugged no-mow. It's not necessarily a full native mix, but where it's intended to grow a little taller to provide some stability. A lot of that is we're really restoring the areas next to the trail. Natives, you got to be careful on your slopes on where you place natives, well, any grasses actually. So a lot of those areas, if to put it back at a flat enough slope in order to make grass the only covering, we'd be laying things way back and taking out trail and taking out trees and everything. So that's why we use a mixture of the seeding and the riprap. Again, for example, like the Merle Hay outfall, we need riprap there because it's a 1.5 to 1 slope. We can't lay it back flat enough to use grass seeding for that surface.
Thanks.
Just a quick thing I dropped in the chat with the tree topping thing. I could definitely see people seeing that and saying, why did they leave this stump here? So it feels like a really good opportunity for us to just educate folks on why we made the decision to do that.
Yeah.
Like maybe just a simple sign of what are the benefits of leaving this? Like this is, and explaining this is a common practice.
Sure. Yeah, and unfortunately, I can't see the chat while I'm presenting either, so it makes it tough. But Parks usually does the notifications for when those projects are coming along, and we can definitely discuss that with them. I think they'll want to get that out in the notification, and yeah, maybe a sign or something would be good, because I'm sure there will be questions.
Yeah.
Okay, anything further on that?
Hit the wrong button there.
That's a good Fast and Furious run through, Kristen. Thank you. So.
Hopefully I don't sound too much like
a lot of moving parts.
Yep.
All right, then we'll move on to the next item. So
Okay.
You're taking that as well?
I am. Let me get the new one started and try sharing again. Okay. So the proposed foundation drain disconnection ordinance and program. This has been discussed a number of times over the years, but it's been a while, so I'm basically going to attempt to start from scratch from this and kind of explain what it is, why we think we need it, and how it might get implemented, particularly when it comes to notifying residents what's going on here. So the foundation drains are, control. There it goes. Okay. The foundation drains are the drains around the bottom of the house that drain the foundation of the building. Storm sewer and sump services began to be regularly installed in the 80s. Sanitary sewer is typically deep enough that the basement, like a floor drain in the basement, can drain to the sanitary sewer. So before the storm sewers were installed, oftentimes that footing drain of the house got tied into the sanitary sewer. They can be routed to a sump pump pit, and if a sump pump is installed, the stormwater flow is pumped up to discharge to ground or connect to the sump service. Again, the storm services are usually quite a bit higher than the sanitary services. And I've got a picture here in a minute that helps explain that a little bit more. So for these older neighborhoods that did not have storm, sometimes still don't have storm. That's, of course, part of our 2019 stormwater drainage study improvements is adding storm to these neighborhoods. We know that there are foundation drains connected to the sanitary. The foundation drains that are connected to sanitary are really environmentally irresponsible. They're detrimental to infrastructure, and they're costly to the city's residents. Our city code expressly prohibits this connection. Every city code I looked at expressly prohibits that connection. Now, we don't have necessarily a record of which ones are hooked up in the older part of town. It's not like we're going hunting for these, but it is not allowed for any new builds. New foundation drains, new buildings that are installed, new sump pumps that are installed, they have to connect to storm sewer if they're available, or they may discharge to grade. Obviously, new developments that we have built since the early 80s have storm sewer, have sump services provided. If a house is built in an infill location, or if someone goes back and adds a sump pump to a house, they have to get a permit for that. We do not allow that discharge to be hooked up to sanitary. Why is this a problem? Sanitary sewer does not have the capacity for stormwater. They're not designed to handle the footing drain stormwater coming into that pipe. When you do have a rain event, for example, the June 30th, 2018 event, this overloads the sanitary sewer. And unlike storm sewer backing up, when you get storm sewer coming out of the pipe, sanitary sewer backing up, you get raw sewage coming out of the pipe in people's basements. That additional flow from those foundation drains that are put into the sanitary sewer make it down to the treatment plant. They're treated by the WRA. Ultimately, it's paid for by the community as part of the number of gallons that are treated by the WRA, and that cost gets passed back through the sanitary sewer fees. Eventually, also, if foundation drains are feeding into the sanitary sewer, we got capacity issues. Ultimately, additional sewers will be needed to address those capacity limitations. Environmentally, it is wasteful to treat stormwater. We don't have to treat it. That's why we've got the MS4, the separate storm sewer permit from the DNR, and it doesn't make sense to put it into the sanitary sewer and have it be treated with sanitary runoff or sanitary discharge. And then ultimately, we're doing a lot of work on current projects, on upcoming projects to upsize storm sewer, to provide storm sewer to new neighborhoods. We're installing sump services with those. If people don't hook up to those new storm sewers, then we are not getting the full impact of those millions of dollars of infrastructure that we're adding to the ground. Now is the opportunity for people to get their homes onto that new sump service and disconnect from the sanitary. And again, as I mentioned, much of the damage to homes in the 2018 event was sewer backups through the floor drains because of that overloaded system. So again, just a little picture to explain what happens here. You can see the basement of the house, and you've got the foundation drain around here. Any drains in the bottom of the basement would also come into the sanitary service, and these sanitary services are typically positioned so that the house is above it. That's one of our current practices with new subdivisions, is setting the elevation each house has to be above that sanitary sewer and allow that gravity flow. Ideally, this would not occur. This foundation drain tied into this sanitary service would not occur. So when it's disconnected from the sanitary service, typically it gets routed to a sump pit, which then kicks it up. So in this picture, it kicks it up to ground level and discharges it into the yard. That's fine from an environmental perspective. Putting the flow back on the ground helps with groundwater infiltration, and it can flow overland. It can get a little messy in neighborhoods. We get a lot of complaints about someone's sump pump, draining into their side yard or being too close to the next property, too close to the fence. So the practice now is to have this pump up, and it's a few feet below the ground, and then it goes out to the sump service. And you can see in this previous picture where the storm sewer is higher up. So you still need that sump pit to get it to the higher elevation and kick it out. So typically, if a house has a sump pump, it's not connected to the sanitary sewer because it's already kicking that drainage up to a higher level and either kicking it out to ground or kicking it out to the storm sewer. We have done 3 major projects in the past that have provided storm services in areas where previously there was none. So way back in 2011, there was a 66th Street relief sewer project. This was a sanitary sewer repair. Some storm sewer was installed with it, and where that storm sewer was installed, some services were provided. There are about 36 residents that were provided some services then. The 73rd Street storm drainage improvements, that was constructed, I want to say between about 2013 and 2016, ended up being a 3 or 4 year project. There were 50 sump services installed with that project to properties that previously either didn't have a connection or would have had to make their own connection to the storm sewer. And then the 72nd Street reconstruction project a few years ago, that went from Douglas up to Prairie, where the new Olmsted Elementary was being constructed. It also went west on Ridgemont and connected to the 73rd Street project from a few years previous. There were 43 new sump services installed then. And when we install a sump service with our city projects, we take that line from the pipe to the right-of-way, so out past the sidewalk into the front yards of folks. This is the same thing that's done in new subdivisions. When a developer builds a new subdivision, they take that sump service out to the right-of-way, and then the builder can hook up from there to the house. With the 72nd Street project, the USSD did offer an incentive program to encourage people to disconnect from their sanitary and hook up to this. It was a partial cost share, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, but up to $3,500 they would give to property owners to defray the cost of that. There were no takers on that project. Nobody took advantage of that reimbursement to hook up. And kind of anecdotally talking with the engineer for the USSD and talking with Tim Stovey in Public Works, it wasn't a cost thing. It wasn't that they didn't want to spend the money on it. Some people just didn't see the benefit. It just seemed like a hassle for them to have to deal with this, and they just didn't want to mess with it. So it was an incentive-only program, and like I said, nobody signed up. With our upcoming storm sewer projects, we've got a couple of others that are going to be provided. So Roseland Drive, we've got 117 sump services that will be installed with that project. There is some storm sewer in that neighborhood, so some of those folks have already hooked up and we're reconnecting. Some of this is brand new storm sewer for them, brand new opportunity for a sump service. And then again, those upcoming projects for 65th Street, 66th Street, I got my date switched around on this one too. And then the Airline Avenue will provide a handful. There's not as many with the Airline Avenue project. I haven't counted up how many are on 65th and 66th because we're a little ways out on that, but I'm guesstimating at least 100 on that one. So what some cities have done is they've established a foundation drain disconnect ordinance. And especially given our experience with 72nd Street, where simply providing an incentive was not enough. We're looking at needing to have both an incentive for hooking up and a disincentive for not hooking up to kind of provide a two-pronged approach. And looking at what other cities are doing, Altoona has had a disconnect ordinance since 2011. They don't provide any assistance for that reimbursement. I do not know if they provided that initially and it's just now that they don't provide it. I can look into that, but currently they do not provide any assistance to hook up. They do charge you $100 a month after 180 days if you've been notified to disconnect and you do not do so. Same thing with Ankeny. Ankeny's ordinance is a little bit more recent, 21. They don't provide any assistance. After 18 months, they charge you $75 a month. Des Moines had an ordinance since 2014. They do have a program to offer assistance for this. Their fine is a municipal infraction, and in Urbandale, our municipal infractions are $750 a day plus $1,000 a day after violation. Usually it goes to civil court. It's hefty to go through that process. Grinnell has an ordinance. It only works with sump pumps, having sump pumps hook up to storms, so it's a little different than what we're looking at, but they also have no assistance and they have a fine. Norwalk does provide a little bit of assistance, $750, and then they have a fine for failure to hook up. Same with Waterloo. Waterloo was the most generous with the assistance. The other cities in the metro, as far as I can tell, do not currently have an ordinance requiring this. They do have the ordinance saying you're not supposed to hook up, but not a specific disconnect ordinance. So if we were going to look for options for what we might do for an incentive or disincentive, we would look to have, and I've got a map here in a minute, but basically we would set up this ordinance and then we would have, by the completion of the project, we would add parcels to the program, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But theoretically, after a parcel is added to the program, let's say that they get 2 years that they're eligible for reimbursement. We would need to look at what's the dollar value for that. We've tried to get some cost estimates on what it would cost a homeowner to hook this up. We haven't had a lot of luck getting a firm answer from people, I think partly because it's a little different from each situation. For just from staff, from our own experiences, doing work in our own homes or seeing other work being done, my gut says you can do most of these hookups for between $2,000 and $4,000. We'll try to get some more information on that on current costs of those hookups. Do we do a total reimbursement? Do we do a partial cost share? What we did with 72nd Street is USSD offered $1,000 right up front for the first $1,000 of cost, and then there was a cost split for the next, however many dollars. So do we look at, if you're above $1,000, we share it 50-50 up to $5,000, and then so you would get $3,500 mask, something like that. We also will discuss this with the USSD. We've got our meeting with them tomorrow. We wanted to talk with you first and kind of get your thoughts on this before we talked with them. But in theory, there would be some cost share here for the reimbursements between the city and the USSD. Obviously, they've got a benefit to doing this, to getting that water out of the sanitary system. And then we'll talk a little bit about how this process might work for homeowners. I realize I'm running out of time, so I'm trying to talk quickly. And then on the flip side, the disincentive for failing to disconnect. During the first year, no charge. We realize people need a year to get hooked up. They can get hooked up and apply for reimbursement. After that, similar to the other cities, we're suggesting we start with a fee. Some people won't realize they really need to take action until they get that first fee on their account, no matter how many notifications you send them. And then after they've had another year to kind of get this done and get off of it, we would increase that fee again. And then the question would be, do you continue increasing beyond that? Do we just leave it at that second year level and call it good? Looking at how we would actually implement this, as far as being eligible for reimbursement, our stormwater utility grant's been very successful, and I think we can take a lot of the lessons we've learned from that and model it after that. One thing we would want to do is we obviously want to test their system, make sure that it is actually hooked up to the sanitary. We don't really want to reimburse somebody that's not connected already. Public Works can assist us with that. The homeowner can then either hire a contractor or do the work themselves and submit the material receipts. They would need to get a building permit. Depending on what you're doing, if you're installing a new sump pump, you need an electrical permit. There are some things you need to check with the building department on. That would be reimbursable costs with the program. When they're all done, the homeowner submits the paid receipts, and then we would reimburse according to our guidelines. We can certainly, like we do with the grant, the stormwater utility grant, we can certainly reevaluate those thresholds too from year to year if we discover, hey, everyone's prices are coming in higher, let's bump this up a little bit, or maybe everyone's is coming in lower. We don't really want, to overly pad this program. We're going to back it down a little bit. And then typically we require a hold harmless too, just to say this is your private project, you're responsible for it. And then thinking about how we notify people about this, we've got the 3 locations, the 3 projects that already have some services. They, certainly 72nd Street, knew those some services were installed, so it's not a surprise to them that it's there. We would let them know that there's an upcoming project that's going to be added to the program. We would notify them when the project is actually complete and actually added to the program. Again, Roseland Drive, they're going to see the contractor coming through. They're going to know how the project's progressing. It's not like it's going to be surprised that overnight they suddenly got a sump service. And we can certainly coordinate location of those sump services with the residents. If they know which side of the house they want to put their sump pit in, we can slide that sump service and provide a closer access for them. Certainly, we were open to that discussion on 72nd Street. In fact, I think we did move some services for better future access, and then as far as we know, folks didn't hook up. And then the council would accept the project. As part of that final acceptance, we would add those parcels that were affected to the program. This would start that timeline for reimbursement and for potential future fees on the bill. And then we can certainly set up a web page for viewing it. And I just started to make a real quick draft web page on what it might look like. And then a map. This is the 73rd Street and the 72nd Street project that was already added. We can add some colors on this. For a matter of private records, private information, I don't think we would post on here whether or not a parcel has hooked up. We would just note whether or not the parcel was in the program. We would, of course, keep our own internal database of who's hooked up. So if someone's looking at buying a house or if someone's not sure, they could reach out to us and we can get them more information on that. And then similar, like our stormwater grant and similar to our monitoring of known septic locations, again, we would track all that documentation. We would know who's been contacted and who has either chosen to hook up, has gone through that process, or who we know hasn't yet, and we can document that internally. And you can see on here too, obviously these projects would be included in the ordinance from day one because some services are already in. We can also put on here, here's the Roseland Drive project. We expect you'll have some services by 2027. Here's the 66th Street project. You should have some services by 2028 on that. So people can see what's coming down the pipeline and can plan accordingly. So I guess some feedback that we need from you all today. It is our belief that a foundation drain disconnect ordinance will improve our environmental sustainability and improve the effectiveness of the new stormwater systems that we're putting in. If we move forward on an ordinance in the next few months, that will coincide nicely with the start of our next stormwater project on Roseland Drive. We can certainly start from day one, letting people know that this program and this ordinance is coming and that we're working out those details and they need to be ready to hook up their houses. So I guess our two questions are, does the council wish to move forward on this ordinance? And if you do wish to move forward, what are your thoughts on the incentives and disincentives?
One question I have is, with stormwater connection, is that something that is Neighborhood Finance Corporation eligible to?
I can look into that. I do not know the answer to that.
Good question. We can find out. I know that they make other improvements available, but let's find out if that's something that eligible participants could have. Also, and again, I know we talked about it internally, and I know we're hitting you with a lot of information. Certainly, this is something to begin the process of discussion and thought process. We can put this on another future council agenda for maybe at the end of the council, just to give you time to absorb, to think about it, and then we can answer any more questions, and then have general discussion among yourselves when you're all face to face too. As we talked internally, and I appreciate the engineering schedules and everything you have to meet, this is an area where we've made some overtures before, and not as readily acceptable as we thought. You know, it's just, especially for areas that had issues, and we provided a solution to help address issues within their homes. You know, some of them took advantage, some of them didn't. But this, we think, is a very important project or program because, as Kristen outlined, it has a number of positive attributes. Number one, we're going into areas that were prone to having issues, particularly that are highlighted in the 2018 event, in water in their basement, sewage in their basement. Also, again, from the beginning of the presentation, just the sheer cost of the volume of material that going down to the WR facility in Des Moines. It's significant. And as our weather events change, we saw that we've had much more rain in the areas, and there's just more water going into those systems that we don't need to be treating at this point in time, and there's a more ecological and appropriate way for stormwater to be addressed other than sending it to the treatment plant and being treated and placing it back into the rivers and streams. So again, this would be a very significant move for the council, and I don't mean that to scare you, but I think it has a lot of positive attributes associated with it. But it is going to be something that your friends and neighbors and folks in the neighborhoods that are affected are going to say, what benefit is it to me? I didn't have any water in my basement. I didn't have this. It's just, there's going to be a lot of public education, and we want to make sure that you folks are very comfortable with this, because like anything that people aren't used to or that's new to them, be a lot of questions and a lot of, wonder why we're doing this. So I just wanted to insert that. I think it's a great program for us to look at. Other cities have done it successfully. And again, as we talked internally, if you go west of a certain area in town, it's not an issue. Storm drain, those were all placed appropriately with the new construction.
I was just going to suggest another element to throw into the mix as you look at the carrot and stick combined approach. which is the Polk Growth Solar model, where we're not just offering them an incentive and they have to do the work of figuring this all out, who to contract with and how to get this done, and then they get reimbursed, maybe, is the way they'll look at it, but instead having them sign up for an initiative that we help them execute, where we've done the work of finding a contractor that they can have some faith in and that the contractor meets with them, very similar to Polk Growth Solar. That would also probably save everybody money, including us, since we're going to reimburse them for at least part of this work. And I think would probably get a lot more interest in getting this done.
We discussed that internally, looking at that option. We certainly, there's some other models like that as well, such as like SQR for the stormwater grant. We've discussed that as well. I think this gets tricky. One, because each house is a little bit different, and it's not like they can necessarily share a common trench or share a common service. So I think some of the economy of scale that you gain from like doing group projects for other things, I think you lose some of that with the individuality of these services. It would certainly, I would hope that there'd be a bit of a cost savings. I think there'd be a large cost in staff time and on our efforts. So I don't know if it's an overall savings. I'm not really sure how you monetize that, but yeah. I would be a little concerned with and just the individual coordination for each one. Where do you want your sump pip? Where do you want it come out? It's really tough for us to put a project together to bid that with accuracy. I think the unknowns of what each contractor will have to find out. A contractor bidding that project is not going to visit 100 homes and get a read on every single one. Yeah. So we talked about that because that is a question. Do we just put everybody together? And one of the things we do for like our sidewalk project and for our stormwater grant project is we do put out a list of people, and as a city we don't recommend one person another, but we do put out a list. Here's people you can contact. I guess I should say, like, we have no known concerns with these contractors, and we would recommend you reach out to a couple of people for quotes, because you're right, it's like, who do I start with? Who do I start talking to? And I think providing people with that information really helps.
And that's really what the Polk Growth Solar program was. It was really about an RFP process to secure someone that these homeowners could trust. Obviously, each and every household was different, just like it would be here. But the costs did go down as they were able to accumulate more customers to deal with at once in a closer geographic area. And so I think that would be the benefit here. So it really was not a particularly taxing piece. It was just some of the pre-work of finding a legitimate contractor, and that contractor getting an opportunity to get some economies of scale for themselves as they went out home by home by home. That's how that worked. So it's, I hear what you're saying. It's not for you to take on the 30 projects at these different households. That wasn't the intent. But if we could do a little bit more than give them a list of 5 or 6 contractors that they may or may not be successful in reaching, I think that might push it a little further. It's just something I'd throw into the mix, as well as the incentives and the disincentives.
Pat, do you know, did they have multiple contractors, or just did they narrow it down to a singular? They did. They ended up narrowing it down to a singular contractor. Okay. I thought that was the case. I just couldn't recall. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So did that use public bidding requirements?
It was an RFP process, and I believe there was some public bidding involved, but I'd have to double check on that.
And we can certainly look into that too.
We can also check in-house. I know John Conyer worked with that when the effort was a little bit more local, working with the group. So I think John's got some insight to that, Kristen, so we can tap into that as well.
I will definitely reach out to him.
I would say just knowing many of the neighborhoods or many of the homes in these neighborhoods and the individuals living there, I'm always wondering if there is some way to take that upfront cost burden off the homeowner. Because I do see that as an initial challenge. I mean, I'm just thinking of my own neighbors and the conversations that we have, you know, just over the fence, and I can see that being an issue for many of them.
And that might be another advantage in narrowing it down to a particular contractor, which would be we could provide them with the initial fee to go out there and at least do the overall assessment of the particular project and put the cost estimate together or something like that. They're just
we have lots of fixed income.
Yeah. We just probably, if the more creative we can be here, then probably the better off we will be, or at least to try something a little bit different beyond just putting in a stick in addition to the carrot.
And I guess just wanted to say, and that's why we wanted to pose this to the council to begin with. I mean, it's completely your prerogative. If you want to fund the entire thing, that, you know, that's your option. It's just, we were trying to look compared to other cities and what dollar amount they were and how you want to call it, generous or aggressive we were being. So again, that's part of having this initial conversation is, you know, what are your feelings? Because again, we can subsidize it to whatever level kind of thing. It will just be a much larger number if that is the case.
Well, I personally really appreciate the thought and the research you've put into this so far. I think it's very informative and helpful. And I think what we're suggesting here is maybe there's yet another element that might actually be a third piece of the, you know, a third leg in the stool of getting engagement.
I think Amy and Pat have asked some great questions. Like conceptually, I think this is something we should move forward with and continue to discuss. I guess maybe coming back to us with more information about the NFC's availability to participate and answering, you know, Pat and Amy's questions. But I think conceptually, I think this is in alignment with what we're trying to do related to sustainability and the ever overarching stormwater questions that we're dealing with. So
yeah. I'm also wondering if there wouldn't be a framing in the way of insurance, and if this would reduce homeowners' insurance costs if folks are connected or disconnected. I guess we want them to be.
That's a great thought.
That might be another angle as insurance rates are through the roof.
Could you send this deck out following as well, just so that we've got this for following conversations?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, Blake, this is one we won't leave in the hallway.
Sounds good to me.
Well, there's some really good ideas here. And some really good thought into this, and I just agree so much with staff how important this is.
Absolutely. I think all good comments, and again, I think we should look at a mix of some incentives and also, you know, to provide the incentive for folks to do this and realize that this is valuable not only financially but also for the overall operation of their system and for their own property. So, good job.
We can get some of these answers for you. We'll plan a little discussion at the end of next week's council meeting.
Great.
That'll keep us on track. And then I know I haven't even seen the schedule yet for the agenda, but just something now that we've given you this, and as we're going to send the deck information out, and we'll have a chance to talk too. You know, again, I'll get back with John Conyer. You know, he did a lot of work on the NFC. We can check with, you know, some insurance folks. You know, what does it mean? You know, it's like flood insurance for your home, so to speak. It's not a national program, but it's something that you can do that someone else is going to financially assist you with, and this provides you some additional assistance that, again, not having gone through this personally, I don't know if if your homeowner's insurance covers floods and those type of backups. Typically, they don't. I mean, we get a lot of questions addressed when they have a storm sewer backup. The city does not pay that, and there's some state law that provides us that coverage. So again, does it fall back on your homeowner's insurance, and how do they address it? I think that's a great question, because again, you're right, Amy. The numbers for homeowners insurance, just our discussion around staff time, has been astronomical. 40, 50%. So any little bit will help. We will try to get as many answers as we can. We'll schedule something at the end of next council meeting for you guys to at least have your continued discussion.
Just one other quick thought. Since the WRA ultimately benefits from this program, I wonder if they've ever done anything to help support such an initiative, because that's really where some of the savings would be, is through the WRA's treatment processes, et cetera.
Correct. I guess the only thing to say on that is really the WRA is the one that just passes the cost on. So again, it's all in the ratepayers that are paying it. And if the treated water is not treated, it keeps, or like I said, if we don't get the water out of there and it goes down the WRA, eventually they're going to have to expand the plant, which is again going to be a huge cost to everybody within the metro. So again, it's one of the things with the WRA, with them contributing. I mean, they're kind of one of those things. They're just going to charge the fees on back, on the way they operate. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you're probably quite right about that, unfortunately, yeah.
Yep.
But it'd be nice
Yep.
if they thought about it a little bit differently.
Yep. All right. Any further comments on that? If not, we're up at the end of the hour and end of the discussion. So if there's nothing else for the good of the cause,